Recently, someone who had discovered this channel brought to my attention a video by a certain Mike Winger that presented, or at least claimed to present, a secular case against homosexuality. The source from which I learned about this video also listed a number of flaws with the video, reasons why the case that it claims to make does not hold. And when I watched the video, I found that I was able to add to this list. Over the course of the conversation, it became clear that there was hope that I might want to make a response to that video, so I will do exactly that in just a moment. Hello, Internet. This is Sophia, the Red Angel, doing my best effort on this channel to produce content that is worth your time to watch and listen to. And today I will be responding to Mike Winger's video titled, "The Secular Case Against Homosexuality." Now, just to be clear, if you are thinking that this is a video by a secular humanist who just happened to come to a different conclusion on the matter of homosexuality than just about every secular humanist that I know of, or even one who is just playing devil's advocate, you've got another thing coming.
You might be like, I don't need a secular case. I got the biblical case. Well, you're right. You don't need one for you, but you want to influence other people in good directions in their lives.
That's right. This video is really just an attempt to present secular justification for a position that the one presenting has already come to based on religious convictions. Granted, I cannot stake my rebuttal to this video entirely on that point, as I do not want to commit the circumstantial ad hominem fallacy. I cannot claim definitively that the case in the video is unconvincing without first watching it, but it is still worth noting that Mr. Winger is not, or at least does not seem to be, approaching the question with an open mind, willing to change his position on the matter of homosexuality if the evidence indicates that he should. It looks much more like he is starting with a conclusion and working backwards. Is that what he is actually doing? Well, I cannot say so definitively, as I cannot read his mind, nor was I with him as he put together his alleged case. But I can say, having watched his whole video multiple times, and having done some checking on some of his claims, that what he came up with definitely seems like the kind of case that one would expect from someone who had operated under such flawed methodology. Now, is Mr. Winger trying to convince people in the secular atheist community to take his position on the matter of gay rights? Well, it is possible, but I do not think that such folk are his primary audience. Here is why.
And also, because some believers who know the biblical case, they think it's wrong, but they're acting like it's okay.
Acting like it is okay? What the frelling heck is that supposed to mean? Oh wait, I have a good guess. There are a lot of Christians, of whom I regrettably used to be one myself, who are not accepting of gay rights from a religious point of view, not affirming in their theological teachings, but who at least realize that they do not have the right to impose their religious beliefs on others. For example, they may be against their church consecrating or even recognizing same-sex marriage, but understand that gay people still have the right to get married in other churches that have different teachings, as well as the right to be married by the justice of the peace, and to have the law of the land recognize those marriages. And while being on board with denying these people rights within the church they would still defend their rights in common society outside the church. My guess is that Mr. Winger wants to convince these people to not just be anti-LGBT in the church's affairs, but also work to impose their anti-LGBT views on society in general.
And for them to see that there's a biblical and secular case might help bring them over to saying, okay, take a stand. Take a stand out of love for the gay community, who is being pushed because of political agendas into doing self-destructive behaviors.
Of course, in reality, the only political agenda that is pushing gay people into self-destructive behaviors is the kind of political agenda that Mr. Winger is promoting. The marginalization of gay people is what causes gay people to suppress their sexuality, leading to all kinds of problems. Also, sometimes it pushes gay people to go under the radar in trying to connect to others, which results in a lot of high-risk behavior. For example, one study on Black and Latinx gay men and transgender women, which you can find linked to in this video's YouTube video description area, showed how the stigma and marginalization faced by these groups not only complicates efforts to treat HIV, but also interferes with efforts to encourage behavior that prevents its spread. So yes, there is a political agenda that pushes gay people into self-destructive behaviors, but it is not the political agenda that Mr. Winger is opposing that does this. Rather, it is the political agenda that he is promoting. Way to go, Mr. Winger.
Secular doesn't mean anti-biblical, it just means in addition to, other than.
Actually, what secular means in describing an argument is that the argument does not in any way depend on religion. Now, true, it does not mean anti-biblical in that a secular argument does not necessarily have to rely on the absence of anything from religion, including the Bible, but it cannot rely on accepting unproven religious claims. So characterizing secular to mean in addition to biblical is wrong, because an argument that starts out with premises from the Bible and just builds upon them is not a secular argument. It is merely an extended religious argument. This may sound like pointless hair-splitting right now, but it will come into play later.
Homosexual behavior is bad for individuals and society because, well, for one, it's related to various physical afflictions, which you're not going to get argument on either side on this issue.
Yes, there is indeed a correlation between homosexuality and certain medical afflictions. But if you are going to use that to argue that homosexual behavior is the cause of said afflictions, then it is time for an installment of Fallacy Exposed. Oh, it's been a while since I've done one of those. And your fallacy is the cum hoc ergo propter hoc fallacy. Gee, I hate these Latin names, but what can you do? Anyway, the fallacy name roughly translates to with this, therefore, because of this. It is a fallacy that you commit when, upon observing a correlation between two things, you jump to the conclusion that one of them must be the cause of the other. For example, as you are doing, assuming that the homosexual behavior causes certain physical ailments just because they are more common in the gay and lesbian communities. So yes, you are not going to get any argument here that these ailments are more prevalent in the gay and lesbian communities than elsewhere, but you will get argument when you claim with that excuse that homosexuality is the cause of these ailments. And there are other explanations for this correlation. The stigma and often severe social repercussions of homosexuality makes it much harder for gay and lesbian people to seek connection in an open and healthy manner. All this sneaking around means higher risk behaviors, hence a higher rate of such infections. So it is not homosexuality itself that causes these infections, but the way that it interacts with the kinds of efforts you are promoting to, well, discourage homosexuality, as you euphemistically put it. And since gay people cannot help being gay, it is your effort to discourage it that needs to come to a screeching halt.
So 1/3 of men who engage in regular homosexual receptive behavior have chronic incontinence or failures of the sphincter muscle because it's been damaged by the behavior. Chronic incontinence. Diarrhea, cramps, hemorrhoids, prostate damage, ulcers, and fissures, which invite infections, are all too common amongst those who engage in same-sex behaviors.
Okay, so I decided to do some looking around on this one. And since, unlike some people, I am under a commitment not to suppress arguments to the contrary of what I want to believe, I have to admit that yes, according to WebMD, there are certain risks to anal sex. I will drop a link to that in the YouTube video description area of this video. That said, it is first important to note that anal sex is not the only kind of sex that men have with other men, and same-sex male couples are also not the only ones who engage in anal sex. But in dealing with these risks, rather than pressuring people to suppress something as core to who they are as their sexuality, one should instead encourage anyone who is interested in anal sex to simply be aware of the risks and take appropriate precautions. Yes, these precautions can include taking these risks into account when deciding whether or not they actually want to pursue that anal sex. But sometimes, even aware of the risks, someone might decide that they want to pursue it anyway. And if they do, there are probably other precautions that they can take to reduce the risk of that behavior. And if they decide that the risks of anal sex are too high, then there are other forms of sex that can be done instead. This is just as true for male-on-male couplings as it is for male-female couplings.
Men who have sex with men have a typical STD rate that over a course of their lives, 75% of them will have STDs.
As would be expected with groups of people who have to sneak in the shadows just to find those intimate connections with people that they are not sexually repulsed by. Having to sneak under the radar just to find that sexual intimacy does not make it easier to be safe and careful in what you do. And gay people would not have to sneak around like that if it were not for people like you.
Of course, not for anyone, pretty much, who stays a virgin until they're married, like the scripture declares. You don't have to worry if that's you. You don't have to get tested or anything because you're good to go. You're good to go.
Where were you when I was diagnosed with a yeast infection on multiple occasions back before I had sex of any kind with anyone? You should have been there to tell the doctor that he had to have gotten it wrong, because I was a virgin at the time. Oh, and I think that there may also be some people who followed all the rules of your imaginary God and got HIV from blood transfusions, or whose spouses got HIV from blood transfusions and passed it on to them. I will put in the video description area a link to a page on Better to Know about ways that one can get an STI other than sex. Some of the methods of transmission that they mention may be in the technically not sexual intercourse, but still kinda a form of sex category. But other things listed, such as sharing a razor, are clearly not acts of sex. How dare you say that people who follow all the biblical rules do not need to get tested? Where in the Bible does it say, "Thou shalt not share a shaving razor with thy neighbor"?
Various cancers, it's not just STDs, cancers such as colon cancer and even breast cancer are higher in the gay community. Don't ask me why breast cancer is higher amongst lesbians, but it is. Statistically, it is.
Okay, I won't ask you why it is higher. How about I instead just ask the LGBT Cancer Network? I will add a link to their page on this matter in this video's YouTube video description area. It mentions 4 chief causes. What are they? Well, first of all, cigarette smoking is more prevalent in the lesbian community. This is unsurprising, but not because of anything inherent to lesbianism. Rather, it is because an increase in prevalence of smoking is something that is to be expected in a community subjected to high amounts of stress, and the stigmatization, marginalization, and flat-out discrimination experienced by LGBT people, including lesbians, is bound to contribute to that. So yes, it is to be expected that there is more smoking in the lesbian community, but only because of homophobia. Next on their list, high rates of alcohol abuse. Same story, something that is to be expected given how much karab society gives them all the time. So if you really want to counter that risk factor, the only tendency that you need to discourage is the tendency of people like yourself to be plurks to them. After that on their list, obesity. Definitely the kind of thing that stress eating can contribute to. Again, the problem is nothing inherent to lesbianism, but rather plurks like you giving lesbians karab for being lesbian. Finally, after all that, the 4th item on their list is the fact that lesbians are less likely to have biological children by the age of 30. Now, unlike the previous factors, this factor does seem, for obvious reasons, to be linked to lesbianism itself, and not the horrendous way that society treats the LGBT community. However, that, still, is hardly a reason to pressure lesbians out of accepting their lesbianness. Pregnancy might give some level of protection against breast cancer, but it is an extremely demanding thing on the body that carries its own risks. Not to mention that when it is all over, there will generally be a new human being in the world who has to be taken care of for the next 18 years and, depending on how they turn out, for the rest of their life. Of course, if a lesbian couple wants to bring a child into this world and is actually ready for all that, then there are ways to do so, ways that also would be much easier if it once again were not for the marginalization, stigmatization, and frequent discrimination that the LGBT community faces.
Those stats come from the CDC.gov. They're not from pro-family websites that are trying to twist things. This is just... Yeah.
Not from pro-family websites that are trying to twist things. Did I hear that right? Is this some kind of a tacit admission that the websites that you are euphemistically referring to as pro-family are trying to twist things? Well, maybe you meant something else. But just because you got your statistics from a website that is more trustworthy than those anti-LGBT hate sites does not mean that you are not twisting the data around to mean something that it does not. Anyway, there is a lot more that I need to say about Mr. Winger's video, but frankly, this episode is long enough. I am going to have to pick back up next time in part 2. A link to part 2 will be added to the YouTube video description area of this video by the time that part 2 becomes available to the public. I would like to thank the anonymous source that brought this video to my attention and gave me a few of the points that I used in researching it. They asked not to be credited by name, so I am thanking them anonymously. Anyway, I hope that you are enjoying this 3-part presentation. Please help my channel grow by liking, sharing, subscribing, ringing the bell, and leaving a comment in the comments area below. Also, if you would like to see updates on my channel that I am unable for now to give you on YouTube due to my current channel size, go visit my Ko-Fi page, which you can find a link to in this video's YouTube video description area. My Ko-Fi page is also somewhere you can go if you wish to support my channel financially, because if you like this channel now, let me tell you, I will be able to do much more with it when this channel's budget is no longer limited to whatever I can afford to siphon away from my personal living expenses. You can also find in this video's YouTube video description area a link to my main links page, from which you can find my Discord and other resources of mine that I might add in the future. And until next time, see ya!